Welcome to Mojo Grip. Mike here. Hope you guys are having a wonderful day. So today's video, I am going to talk about things that you can do to help you pass your check ride. Now, this video was requested by a few subscribers, and over the last few weeks I've tried to make it, so today we're going to make it happen. Now, full disclaimer, the things that I'm going to talk about in this video and the advice that I'm going to give are purely my own opinion, okay? So it's based on my opinion and my personal experience, so take everything with a grain of salt. You know, things that I talk about may or may not necessarily help you, but I do think that you find some things very helpful, okay? So without further ado, let's get started. The first rule that I would advise you to do is to get the ACS, okay, and the Blue Book. All right, if you're a pilot in training, you're probably familiar with this. If you don't, just ask your instructor. Okay, the ACS will help you as a study guide for your flight portion. So a lot of what you're going to have to study for your flight portion is going to be in the ACS. So use it as a study guide for your flight portion, and then the Blue Book, use that as a study guide for the oral portion of your check ride. So if I didn't mention that before, your check ride is going to be two main parts, and one is oral, which you're going to be asked questions from your examiner, and you have to give them answers orally. And then the second part will be your flight portion, which you're going to be tested on your skills and your decision-making skills as a pilot. Okay, so repeating again, use the ACS, get the ACS now, and get the Blue Book now. Based on my experience, for example, whenever you schedule for your check ride, it's usually months in advance, so that way you have enough window to study your flight and study the oral part. Except you get lucky or unlucky like myself, where I really only had a week to study because my check ride date just came out of nowhere. But needless to say that I was practicing and studying way before then. So, but again, if this is your first time going through this process, it's best to schedule your check ride months ahead, at least 3 months ahead. That way you have enough time to get your ACS, get the Blue Book, and study your butt off. Okay, so that's the first rule. The second rule that I would give you is that use the same airplane. Do not, I repeat, do not try to use a different airplane for your check ride. So by that, what I mean is, for your check ride, make sure you book or rent the same exact airplane that you've been using to practice. And by same, I don't mean same model, same type, the very same airplane, same name tag. Okay, I'll give you an example. The school that I trained in, they had a fleet of Diamond DA-40, and they had at least 3 or 4 of basically the same exact airplane in terms of make and model. But I flew just about every single one, and they all felt differently to me. So if you love yourself, I would definitely advise you to only use the airplane that you have been training with weeks before your exam. If you on the last minute decide to go and fly a different airplane or rent a different airplane for your check ride, you might run into some trouble there. And again, this is just a personal preference. And again, giving you from my experience, when I flew different airplanes, even though they were the same exact make and model, I noticed some differences. It could be sitting position, it could be the way the stick feels, it could be the way the turn feels. So for me, to be safe, just use the same exact airplane for your check ride. Okay? Rule number 3, which can be a very tough one, try and get some sleep. Okay? A day before your exam, try your best to sleep. In my experience, my exam was actually a day after Christmas. So it was tough for me to even lay my head down. We had guests over. I tried not to study for that day. And then when everybody left, I tried to go to bed at 10 p.m. I could not sleep. So, and for some people, this can be an issue where your nerves are going to get to you. This is a big deal. You know, your check ride is a big deal. So the night before, you're trying to make sure everything is prepared, trying to make sure you know your stuff, trying to make sure you have all the materials and everything you need for the next day. So you might be a little overwhelmed about the check ride, but if you can't, try to get some, even if it's a few hours, even if it's a few hours less than what you normally sleep, but I would say try your best to get some sleep, because chances are your nerves are going to get to you. Rule number 4. Now, on the very check ride date, obviously you have a time schedule and everything. Make sure you eat. Make sure you have a good meal either before you leave or also during a break. So during your check ride, probably after you go through your oral, you might have like a short break, and within that break I would advise you to have some snacks or something you eat. Keep in mind that your check ride is going to be literally the whole day. Okay, so don't try to schedule anything else for that day. At least that's my personal experience. Now, when you get to the oral portion of your exam, once your examiner goes through with you how everything is going to go, remember to keep your answers short and sweet. Okay, short and sweet. Don't try to elaborate or try to be a smart ass about anything. Just if they ask you something, try to make it short and sweet. And the reason why I say that is sometimes if you try to go too much or elaborate too much in an answer, you can dig some holes for yourself. All right, if you speak too much or too long on a specific question or topic, you can literally dig a hole for yourself. And typically what would happen is if you continue to talk about something, you're just creating room for the examiner to ask you more questions on that topic or subject. And you don't want that. For your sake, to keep short time and to get things moving along faster, whenever you're asked to speak on something, keep it short, keep it sweet, and let your examiner move on. That's the best thing you can do for yourself. Don't dig any holes, okay? And as I said, your exam is going to feel like a conversation. It's not going to be like a multiple choice where you're given options or they ask you direct questions. In some cases, you can get a direct question like, what's an airment? What's a segment? Okay? But for the most part, the way the question is going to be proposed to you is going to be, let me try to give an example. So say for example, you're asked to bring out your chart, right? And for the exam, you've already been instructed to do a flight plan or whatever have you. So the examiner might ask you specifically on that flight plan, or they can just ask you to bring out your chart and they'll point to somewhere. They can say, okay, this is where we are. I'm trying to go here. And they ask you, how do I get from point A to point B? Okay, so in that one, you might think that's just the main question, which it is, but within that question, there's probably 5 more questions coming. And this is the reason why. So if they ask you, tell me how I'm gonna get from point A to point B, and you go ahead and tell them, well, I would take this route, and this is how I would do my flight plan. And then the next question could be, okay, why did you take this route instead of this route? Because this route is faster. Why did you go ahead and take this route? And also within the route that you propose, you're probably gonna have restricted areas, you can have mountains, you can have VORs, just certain things on the chart, and each one the examiner may pick and choose. Okay, I see this is a restricted area in your in this route. Why did you choose to take this route instead? And you basically, what is asking you there is, what is a restricted area? Or you could go through like a military practicing area, and they will ask you questions on those things. My point is, the questions are going to come indirectly. It's going to be where you're talking about a specific subject matter, and then they have a conversation with you about it. And simple as that. And try your best. You know this stuff because you studied it. Now, the second part of that, which is rule number 6, is if they ask you a question and you honestly don't know the answer, just be honest about it. Say, I don't know it, and let it be. The examiner may teach you or give you an answer of to that question, or they can just move on. The worst thing you can do is try to bullshit your examiner. Don't do it. If you don't know the answer to a question, just be honest about it. Don't try to, pick something just out of the blue and think that would help you. That would actually hurt your chances more than it will help you. And chances are the examiner will try to explain to you or give you the answers. Again, they're really your friend. When you're having that conversation, they will help you. Even after something that was repeated during my Checkride is, after I answer a question, the examiner themselves will elaborate more on that subject matter, and they'll even tell you why they ask you that question. And keep in mind that a lot of your exam is about safety. Okay, keep that in mind. So what I mean by that is your check ride is not specifically testing if you can fly or not. They know that you know how to fly an airplane. That's why you're sitting there in the first place. That's why you're having a check ride. But really, the key that the examiner and the FAA is looking for is how do you make good decisions when you're flying? Your decision making skills, and how safe are you as a pilot? To me, just based on what I observed during my check ride, that was the main theme. Was they wanted to know, if we let this guy out in the world by himself, is he going to be a safe pilot? So keep that in mind whenever you're answering questions, either through your oral or through the flight portion. Okay? So now moving on to the flight portion of your exam. Once you hopefully you pass the oral. So typically what would happen is, if you do well on the oral, they tell you, okay, you did well, let's move on to the flight portion. Now, if you didn't do well on your oral, sadly, your exam is going to end right there. So they'll let you know, well, you fumbled a lot with this or that, and they don't think you have enough knowledge to move on to the next step, and they'll let you know. But hopefully that doesn't happen. Hopefully they tell you did well, and boom, you go on to the flight portion of the exam. So for the flight portion, here are 4 things that I would encourage you to keep in mind. First is safety first. Again, I would continue to repeat that. Through your whole exam and your whole check ride, you would see that that's the repeating theme. Safety first. Okay, that's the first rule. The second rule, you are pilot in command. Okay, don't forget that. Don't forget that for 1 second. Think of your examiner as just a passenger coming along on a flight with you. For the flight portion, you are pilot in command. And remember that. Really remember that. I've heard some students, fumble with their flight portion because they basically didn't have that mental note that they were pilot in command, and they thought of their examiner as an instructor, which is not the case. They are instructing you on things to do, but you have the last decision. Number 3, use your checklist. Okay, your examiner is looking to that. And for your own good, even once you're done with your check ride, it's always a great habit. If you've seen in my video where I talk about using a checklist, it is very important to use your checklist. So especially during your check ride, your examiner is checking for it. So use your checklist in every phase of flight, your pre-flight, startup, taxi, takeoff, all of that. And when you're in flight also, try to use your checklist, especially when you're coming into land. Do your gums check and use your checklist when you're coming into land. Now, rule number 4, which again, you can take this with a grain of salt. During my check ride, what I did was every maneuver that I was doing, or everything that I was doing in the flight portion, I was verbally saying it out loud. So for example, either taxiing or whenever I'm doing a maneuver, when he tells me, for example, give me a slow flight, okay? So when I'm doing my slow flight, I say out what I'm doing. Okay, I'm putting my power to 13 on the manifold. I'm doing this. I'm putting my mixture, whatever it is that you're doing, say it out loud. So I don't know if that helped or hurt my chances, but that's what I did, where every action I was taking during that flight, I was verbally saying it out loud. And the last advice I would give you during your flight portion is take your time. Take your time. Don't try to run through any procedure. So, for example, this is how the flight portion generally will go. At least this is how mine went. So we got in the airplane, we took off, and the first thing I was asked to do was run through my flight plan that I prepared for that check ride. And we did just a portion of it. I basically, ran through like the first 3 moves and pointed the airplane to the direction of where I was going, and it said, okay, that's enough. So you might get an examiner like that where he either takes you through the whole thing, I doubt that would happen, or just some parts of the flight plan that you prepared. Okay, so that was the first thing. The second part was I was asked to do maneuvers. So once you go through the flight plan, you're asked to do your maneuvers, which is your steep turns, stalls, slow flights, and things like that, and also your descent. That was one of the things that I was asked to do in case of a fire. How do you descend quick enough that you get on the ground? Once you're done with all of that, then you're asked to do landing, which is the last portion of the flight. I would say one thing that I remember specifically, so once we were done with the procedures, with the maneuvers, so he said, okay, let's go back to the airport and do some landings. I was like, okay, so I called into the radio and they told me, okay, you're cleared to land in runway 6. So on this specific day, first of all, my exam took place in San Bernardino Airport, and they have 2 runways. On this particular day, one of the runway was not active, and I believe it was runway 26. I could be wrong. So this is how it worked. So this, assuming these are the 2 runways, this is 26 and this is 6. And we were coming in from right here. We were on this side of the airport. We were coming in right here, and we were high enough. We were probably maybe 1,000 feet or so above the pattern altitude. So when we got to the base of 26, the examiner told me, oh, I think we're a little high. Why don't you slip the airplane so we can get down faster? So I went ahead and slipped the airplane, right? And I slipped the airplane enough to get to pattern altitude, and then I kept going through the base so I can go on runway 6, which is the active runway. And I remember he looked at me funny, like, what am I doing? And I was like, oh no, we can't land on runway 26. The tower clearly said that the active runway is 6. And he said, oh. But anyway, long story cut short, when I think of that moment now, and this is why I said, remember that you're a pilot in command. On that day, for me, my examiner insinuated that, okay, I should land on a specific runway, but I decided to land on a different runway. And when I think about that moment now, it could have been a total wrong judgment on the examiner part, but I honestly believe that that was part of the test. He was likely testing to see if I was focused or if I was distracted. All right, first they asked me to do that slip, and then he wanted to see if I paid attention to the radio, because that's also one of the skills that you're going to be tested on. How well do you communicate on the radio? How well are you paying attention to what's being said on the radio? Okay, now again, I don't know for sure, but I honestly think that that was part of the exam where he was testing if I was paying attention on the radio or not. But who's to say? But anyway, once we did that, then we did about 3 or 4 landings. And one advice I would give you on your landing is, other than take your time, remember that your landings are not going to be perfect. Okay, as long as you land within the threshold and the lines that you want to be at, sometimes you may not have like the perfect cushion, or your wheels may not touch down perfectly, but as long as you land within the lines, you should be fine. And as long as your base turn, final, all that is done correctly, you should be fine. So don't beat yourself up if one landing you just kind of bounce or dropped on the floor. And remember, there's certain things that you may not be able to control, aka weather or what the wind is doing. So you're still a new pilot, relatively new pilot. So, and the examiner knows that. So they're not going to ask too much of you. What they're looking for is the procedure to landing. Are you doing it correctly? Now, how you land, you know, again, it could be questionable, but it's okay. All right. Every landing where you're able to touch the ground safe, that's a safe landing. And that's what the examiner is looking at. They're not looking, oh, how smooth is your landing, how perfect it is. So don't worry about those things. Just take your time, do your procedure right, and you should be okay. And once you taxi back to the FBO, hopefully you're here. The good news, hey, you passed, and that will make your day. I know it did mine. Okay, so I hope that is helpful. If you have any questions or you want to share your experience, just leave in the comments below. Okay, so I hope you guys learned something from this. If you did, please go ahead and give a thumbs up. Again, my name is Mike. Thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you on the next video. Peace.